I started to pursue this on a part-time basis during internship or residency process and found it fascinating. And eventually it became a full-time process. Probably in the late 80s, became interested in cognitive disorders, specifically Alzheimer's, and also sleep. And gradually my practice in clinical trials moved to neurology and sleep disorders. Probably the area that I find most interesting in my career was initially getting involved in one of the first medications for cognitive impairment that ultimately was approved. I had the opportunity to do grand rounds and physician training, and what came out of this process was the recognition by many of my colleagues that this was truly an abnormal situation, a disease, if you will, Alzheimer's, and not a normal part of aging. I hired Dixie probably 30, 35 years ago, and she's been with me since.
For myself, most satisfying, the time that we've spent in clinical research, watching the industry evolve, the development of CROs and how they have strengthened that relationship between the site and the sponsor, and the introduction of the technology that's available now that was not 30 years ago. Everything from electronic diaries to mapping sleep to remote subject visits that you can do, particularly in this COVID environment. That's been very exciting and fulfilling to be a part of that process. So the impact of COVID was felt initially quite strongly in early March, mid-March in our community. And so we took very aggressive steps to mitigate exposure for our staff and our subjects. We split our staff in half, sent half home to work remotely, the other half in the office. A key member of each department remained in the office to keep the study visits flowing. We took subject visits and spread them out so we didn't have more than one subject in the building or one part of the building at one time. We made available remote visits. We made available PPE and protective coverings for our subjects and screened them pretty heavily prior to allowing them to come into the office. Probably will continue to offer the phone assessments for those that really don't need to make a trip to the office if they're not on a trial.
I hope once the COVID pandemic is over that we'll return to a more patient or screening or contact, because I think the personal part is important.
The facial expression is very important when you work with individuals. And so we have implemented plastic dividers on our desks so that we can still feel that connection and see a smile and have that more intimate conversation. So we've had to think on our feet and be able to mitigate the risks to both staff and the subject any way that we could. And we've been able to stay open throughout this process.
I think AI and other technologies, which had a foothold long before COVID, have been strengthened by the process of social distancing, and there'll be more allowance for remote visits and other ways, I think, of gathering data without the patient contact that in some areas or at various times has been difficult for families.
I feel that the technology has been there. It has been very underutilized. And now we're put in a position where we're extremely familiar with it. We're comfortable. And I think the general public is more comfortable and it becomes more commonplace. It's less intimidating. And so sponsors by necessity have had to adapt and allow, for instance, your cognition to do an assessment or rating from one location, your subjects at another, Dr. Thein is even at a third location, and we're all meeting up on this social platform that I believe now is becoming very commonplace.
And using video conferencing allows you to capture the facial expressions, also allows you to capture some of the nonverbal cues, especially in a patient with Alzheimer's, as an example. That's important in the diagnosis or ultimately the ability to assess the patients for change. The relationship that a site has with a CRO is similar to one that one has with the sponsor if the CRO is truly a conduit and they can facilitate communication. Sometimes they're able to respond faster to a situation. There are probably great CROs and there are probably not so great CROs. There are CROs in learning, what I call virtual CROs. The CROs also can have at their fingertips, I think, staff that monitor and do things on a regular basis and can be very, I think, easy to work with. The thing that's important, I think that's most important, is that the CRO not look to impede the conversation and is really open to a site if they have questions or concerns to talk directly with the sponsor and to facilitate that process.
I've enjoyed the relationship because I find that they organize the sponsor and they're aware of the site needs a little bit more. They're less clinically focused from my perspective, more administrative, and it tends to smooth the process a little bit more as far as startup and generally exchanging information and processing. I do appreciate CROs that assign an individual to the site and that person is a go-between and they're more available than working with a larger team. I appreciate having a single point of contact, I guess you could say. It makes that process run more smoothly. So you work more as a team member instead of someone sort of overseeing us. I prefer to think of them as a teammate in the process, in the research process.
I think one of the things that's also important or very important is the consistency of the CRO staff and that the turnover be low. So if I've developed a relationship with a monitor, I can count on that monitor working through the entire project. And as an example, working with Clinilabs, not only have I found that the case, I've also developed a relationship that's carried on through other studies with the same monitor.
Dr. Thein was saying we have some we like and some we don't like. We definitely have favorites, and Clinilabs is one of our favorites for these reasons that we're mentioning. We feel there's consistency, and we can reach out if we have questions on a different study, not always the same protocol, and just working for years with the same CRO becomes comfortable, and we sort of have a flow, and definitely view them as teammates in our research endeavors.
I think one of the most rewarding parts of working with Clinilabs has always been the availability not only of monitors and project coordinators and directors working on the project, but all the way up to the highest level. I know that there have been times in the past where I've actually reached out to Gary, who started the company, and Dr. Zammit has always been available when I've reached out with a concern, and I think he's been a gem. The whole company is truly a delight to work with, and quite frankly, wherever we get the opportunity to provide input, they're one of the first CROs that we think of.
What makes Clinilabs different and such a joy to work with are the personal relationships. They take the time to make sure that we're all on the same page and really working as a team moving forward. And I greatly appreciate that. You don't find that very often.
I think most of the staff at Clinilabs are tenured. They've risen up through the ranks, and they know research, and they're sensitive to issues that sites tend to bring to the table. The care for patients and the getting of answers that are necessary to conduct a trial, I think.
Yeah, and I
properly.
Yeah, and I feel like the Clinilabs employees are definitely in the trenches with us. They're not removed.
We've been working with Clinilabs now for 25 or 30 years, and I hope that we'll continue to work with them. They have the depth of knowledge and the staff that always makes them a valuable resource. I think patients need to consider research more and more as an option. It's not only where we get answers for things like COVID-19, which we're struggling with now, but in more complex diseases. You know, I've been working for almost 40 years in the field of research and have yet to find an answer for slowing Alzheimer's, as an example. And now, after many, many years in sleep research, I've seen the first drug that's going to be tested for sleep apnea instead of utilizing surgery or an appliance of some kind. And people, by participating in this, not only provide us answers, whether the trial is a success or failure, which is important, but also they're able to get sometimes the latest answers that help them with their disease.
I don't believe you should limit yourself. I think subjects need to explore every available option. And certainly research provides for the subject an immensely, obviously affordable option. There's no charge for our services, and they tend to have full workups. They're meeting with skilled researchers, medical professionals, and we spend each visit quite a bit of time with research subjects that they might not get with their primary care physician in an HMO environment.
Well, they don't. They're time limited. I mean, when you consider that the average individual spends about 7 minutes in a managed care situation with a physician, and here they get sometimes hours. They're listened to, they're involved in a process.
And I believe that it can be very empowering for a clinical research subject to sort of get a handle on whatever their ailment may be. We provide vast amounts of information on their disease specifically and answer all of their questions. And it's a very in-depth process. And I feel that a subject is put in a position of empowerment where they feel that they're doing something.
They're part of the
team,
right,
part of the process.